is Mr. Daniel Assisi. His topic this afternoon is Spiritism and the Freedom of Choice. Please join us in welcoming back Mr. Daniel Assisi.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Great. I'm surprised you're all answering me after lunch, especially when we get in the comfortable room with air conditioning. Thank you. Today, given continuity to this wonderful day that we had yesterday, where we celebrated many different things, including the great opportunity that we all have had to learn about Spiritism and to be exposed to Spiritist books, we want to go a little further into Spiritism and freedom of choice. So that will be our topic for today. The interesting thing is something that we all know. Everywhere we look today, there's choice. In our modern society, there's so much choice that sometimes it's overwhelming. How many things out there? So the big question becomes, not only do we have choice, but what do we do with all the choices that we have? Is there a tool that can help us make better choices? Can we live better lives based on our choices? And if so, how to do it? So what I'm hoping we're going to do in the next couple of minutes is to visit a little bit the choices that we have, and find out more about this tool, Spiritism, that can help us make better choices. And not only that, but we're also going to hope to make a bridge into another tool that's not a Spiritist in nature, but jives completely with Spiritism as well in many different ways, to understand that maybe we can empower ourselves mentally to do better choices. And then hopefully we will wrap it up by looking at a great example of choices being made and how we can emulate those choices to live a better world. Would that be okay? So bear with me, okay. So I'm really glad that we are actually after lunch. Because had I put the hot dog there before, I would have probably lost like 10 or 20 people going out there. So this is no subliminal message. This is just, what I want to talk to you is about a very sophisticated tool I've developed. It's called the hot dog paradigm. I'm very fancy like that. But it's to illustrate the choices and the cognitive overload of the world that we live in. There's so many choices sometimes we don't even realize it. Let's suppose that you like hot dogs. And let's suppose that you are going to the grocery store to get some of the necessary requirements to buy yourself a hot dog. Well, you will be met with choice from the onset, from the beginning. In fact, I have taken the liberty of running some numbers for us, if that's okay with you. A quick search tells me on the internet that there are indeed 20 brands of hot dogs, buns. And I'm talking about brands. I'm not talking about buns, right? I'm talking about bun makers, not the buns themselves. Because, you know, you can have sesame seed, you can have all kinds of things. But let's leave that aside for now. Talk about manufacturers of buns. And on top of there, I could also quickly identify 40 different brands of sausages, wieners, or links, whatever you call the actual hot dog meat process thing, right? So you can pick one of those 20 buns and match it with one of those 40 hot dogs. These are brands. Again, you know, you can have cheese stuffed hot dogs, you can have jalapeno hot dogs apparently, and all this kind of things. But because I am a purist and I like fundamentals, we're going to stick to the fundamental hot dog. Please do not contact me later about bacon wrapped hot dogs or any of the sort, right? This is up to you. This is your choice, free will. But anyways, if we are met just with these quick choices, 20 brands and 40 different types of meat or whatever it is, we're going to find out that we actually have 800 different combinations possible. So in picking one brand of hot dog buns and one of the 40 brands of sausages, you're making one choice among 800, right? And interesting enough, there are also 418 brands of mustard. Brands, not types, right? I'm going to keep it simple because otherwise we'll get crazy here. And I don't know about you, but you must have mustard on your hot dog. So now I have to make a choice between one of the 418 brands of mustard to go with those things. And when I pick one of those things, or if I don't know how to pick, I now have 334,400 different combinations of possible hot dogness so far, right? You are with me? You understanding the logic of the thing here? So if I were just to have a bun, a meat, and a mustard, I could have 334,000 different combinations. A bun from this brand, a hot dog from this brand, a mustard from this brand, and then another brand, and so forth and so forth. But because I'm at the forefront of thinking, I also have to have ketchup. I know we could debate on whether there should be ketchup on a hot dog or not, but I have to have ketchup. So my free will tells me I should also go for ketchup. 300 different brands of ketchup, which brings us now to, whew, you ready? It's a lot of work at getting a hot dog. 113,695,000 different combinations, right? You're with me? It's a world of choice, people. So all of this to say that if we were to try one combination a day of hot dogs, and let's say that you eat 4 times a day, hot dog for lunch, hot dog for dinner, hot dog for a snack, and hot dog for breakfast, right? Hot diggity. It would take you 28,424,000 days to eat all those combinations of hot dog. And that really surmounts to 77,000 years, 873,000, probably longer than humanity has been walking on this planet. So that's choice. That's choice in our society today. We have gone to the moon and back. We have built amazing technologies. We have created comfort beyond our wildest understanding. We have air conditioning, indoor plumbing, all things that 100 years ago would have seemed impossible. We have cars that take us more than 20 miles. I don't know if you know this, but before cars were invented in the early 1900s, people did not leave their hometown very often. In fact, they were not known to go more than 20 miles from the place they were born. So you really did not know about the world at all. And all of a sudden, we can talk to people across the planet. We can quickly pick up a phone and get access to information on the website about anything. But has that made us fundamentally happier? Maybe. But we're also struggling as a society to find meaning in different things. Suicide rates have never been higher. And that's really a horrible thing for us. So we have a lot of choice, a lot of opportunities out there. But what we don't have is a set way for us to make better choices, to live better lives. Most of us struggle with that. We also have a choice of different systems and different religions and different thinking processes and ethics on how to do that. But even that hasn't given us great understanding. So what I mean to say here is that even though there's great choice out there, we're still struggling to make these choices work for us. Just having lots of choices doesn't make us happier. Choosing correctly is what ought to make us happy. But how do we choose? Who can help? Is there a system? Well, we're going to go along our path here to enlightenment. And our next step then is to find some kind of tool, method, meaning to help us make better choices. And maybe one of those choices would be not to eat, 77,000 years of hot dogs. Right? That's clearly a good choice, I would say. But what I really want to get at is that if we look at Spiritism, which is a progressive body of knowledge, which is something that's always growing and changing, even though it's kind of remains still very simple at its core, we're going to find this fantastic book, the Spirit's book, which is a compilation of questions and answers done by different folks during different times that were all put together by this amazing educator we call Allan Kardec, and who also kept the format of this book of questions and answers, which makes it really easy for us to reference and read, but also makes it really hard for us to kind of sit down and read it from the beginning to the end. I always say that I never really met anybody that tells me, hey, sorry, I can't go to the movies with you on Friday because I'm going to go home and read the Spirit's book. So at first it doesn't seem like the most exciting book because it's not necessarily like a story and narrative, but it's an amazing book they can keep resorting to through time, going back and forth and finding great answers. And one of the great answers and questions of this book is question 843, which we can find in the third part of the Spirit's book. That deals with more with laws and different things in nature. But the question here, it's really great and fundamental because it's aimed at exactly that idea. And one of those philosophical points that we have debated for a long time is whether we have a choice in our actions or not, right? I think intuitively we all know that we do. We just talked about hot dogs, right? I don't think that God has really... I think we can all agree that God's probably not that much worried about what hot dog we eat, right? So there's probably not predetermination there. And that's when I brought the hot dog in, because it's such a simple example, just to drive the point that, yes, we have choice. We kind of know that intuitively in our day-to-day life. But what we're really talking about here is more of a ethical and moral choices, the bigger choices in our lives. And the Spirit's book addresses that very well when the question is posed to the good spirits: do humans act with free will? And the answer, as is always the case, is short and sweet, but extremely powerful. And it takes sometimes a while for us to unpack that question because it's so brilliant. And the answer here is, since they have freedom of thought, they have freedom of action. Without free will, human beings will be machines. Very simple, very straightforward, right? But what I think is really interesting here is that there are two big components. There's thought, and then there's action. So there's a system at play here, basically telling us, since we have freedom of thought, we have freedom of action. To have freedom of action, we must necessarily have freedom of thought. To act, we must necessarily have to have thought. Otherwise, it would be a reaction, right? You with me so far? So our ability to choose to carry out an action is directly dependent on our ability to reason and to have thoughts. The more I learn about things, the more actions I can do, because now I know more. So does a kid have freedom of free will and freedom of action? Yes, it does. But probably less so than we as grown-ups do, right? When a kid says, you know what, today I'm going to not brush my teeth. And the parents go, no, you will brush your teeth tonight. Or at least I hope you guys are doing that. The kid does not have all the information. He hasn't clearly thought all the outcomes of that. That's why parents interfere, because they haven't fully congealed and developed their thought process to know how important that is. So sometimes their freedom is curtailed, is short, because they don't have all the information. So the more we grow and the more we become responsible, the more actions and the more freedom we have to do things. So when we are young, we don't have a lot of freedoms. When we grow, become more independent, become smarter, we develop further. When we develop spiritually, become greater and better helpers and spiritual helpers on the other plane, we're giving more responsibilities. And we can help more people and we have more freedom. So the interesting piece here is to see that indeed the Spirit's book suggests a method for us to carry out our actions, which is to base them on thought. And to get as much information as possible so that we can make the best possible action, right? In fact, this is so interesting. That's actually reflected, I always think this is really cool. This is actually reflected on the very structure of the Spirit's book. I often say, and people think I'm being funny, but I'm not, I'm just being funny looking, which is, The most exciting part of the Spirits book for me is the introduction and the table of contents. The table of contents, if you take some time to think about it, and we can talk about it some other time, it's brilliant because it shows us that we have, what, 4 parts in the Spirits book, right? First causes, then there's a spiritual world, then there's the laws, right? And there's hopes and solaces. Basically, the way Kardec structured it was, on the first causes, we get all these questions about fact-finding. We're going to find out about things. Is there a God? How does it work? Do we have a soul? What is it? And so forth. On the second part, when we find out that there's indeed a spiritual world, the second part, called spiritual world, is about how it works. How do we reincarnate? Does it happen here? Does it happen there? How do we go back and forth? The third part is a normal development of that, which is, hey, if we know these things exist and there is an interaction between the both planes of life, what does it mean? Should I change the way I act and behave? Because now I know there's reincarnation and I will live on. What does it mean? So the third part helps us understand that by laying down all these laws, which are these things that happen in nature that we have to understand, right? Law of freedom and love and work and so forth. So all the rules that kind of we perceive to be out there in the universe. And the fourth part is a natural progression, hopes and solaces, is if you follow these laws, because, I'm going to go back a little bit, we know that there is all these things happening, we know there's a spiritual world, and we know there are these laws governing the spiritual world. If you follow these laws, this will happen. If you don't follow these laws, this will happen. So the fourth part is about hopes and solaces. It's about how to behave too, which I think is brilliant, right? All that to say, what I want to sum up here is the Spiritism is a great tool. It is not content. It is a way to arrive at content. It's a tool for us to use to develop our own decisions. So the more information we get, the more questions and things we read, we are then able to make better decisions. Seems very convoluted. So I wanted to break it down a little bit to more practical examples, if that's okay. Spiritism is great in giving us the tools. And because Spiritism is not a dogmatic body of knowledge, it doesn't tell us to do anything. It simply informs us. And then it's up to us to decide whether we want to do it or not. It doesn't necessarily always tells me, hey, at 8 o'clock in the morning, you should wake up, brush your teeth, and do this. Spiritism will never violate our conscience like that. It will give us the general direction, but it is up to us to do the walking, right? To go and up on our hill of understanding. So I want to bring in another work for which I thought was very interesting to help us see how all that Spiritism is talking about jives with the choice. And one of the things here that I think is really interesting is a work by Dr. Carol Dweck, who works at Stanford. And she wrote this a very simple and really great book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. And her study really deals about motivation, about how people succeed and why. What is it that they do? What kind of choices do they make that makes them happy or successful? Right? And that's a picture of her right there. And I wanted to share with you a couple of pieces so you to see if that kind of fits with what we're talking about. I'll let you be the judge of that. So in the book, she tells us of the studies that she's done, and it's a very easy book to read. It's not an academic book, so it's really kind of fun and quick to do. And in it, she posits there are 2 different kinds of mindsets in the world, right? There is a fixed mindset, and there is also a growth mindset, and that people generally fall into one or the other. Sometimes we can be both, so hang in there with me. Let's use some illustrations, some examples, so that we can kind of see that out. Because she also deals a lot with education, and as a researcher, she looked in many different researches around the world of education. And one interesting example, for instance, before we get to the education piece, is Thomas Edison. We all know that Thomas Edison was considered to be a genius and that he accomplished many things. And we have this innate ability to think that genius just are, right? Even though Thomas Edison distinctly said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, that you must do the work, unfortunately, we have accepted in our society that you are either born with it or you're not. And that's the fixed mindset that she talks about, right? That no matter how much work you put in, you'll never be a Thomas Edison because he's a genius and you're not, right? That's kind of how sometimes we think about it. Or I will never be great at math because I just wasn't born that way, right? How many times have you heard that? We use that very many times. And she goes on to say that indeed there's the other mindset, which is the growth mindset, that tells us that if we look at ourselves as a growing organism being, we can be better, and we'll probably have an easier time succeeding in life. In fact, she tells us that all those great successful people she interviewed seem to display the growth mindset, where they applied to themselves, where they gave themselves the opportunity to grow. They didn't hold themselves hostages to the idea that they either had it or didn't have it. So an example was Garfield High School in Los Angeles, where we probably have seen a movie or a couple of books and things about stand up and deliver. There was this teacher, Jaime Escalante, that came in, and Garfield High School, close to where I work actually, used to work, is a comprehensive high school, lots of different people in there, and a lot of students are of Hispanic background. And teaching calculus in high school is something that, one, is not expected, and oftentimes doesn't go too well, especially in very big urban schools. But what was interesting was that Jaime Escalante, the teacher, went in there with the question of, how can I help my students succeed? Not, can they succeed at calculus? So what happened was, because of his approach, believing that everybody could learn, no matter what, he was able to infuse that in his students, and his students performed admirably well. In fact, they went into past calculus, and we all heard the stand up and deliver things about how teachers can really change students, and we see the movies coming out about it. So this is a quick example, one quick example about it. And one of the interesting stories here is that one of the kids, when Dr. Dweck found out about all this research, she went out and she tried to apply it too and carry out some research of her own. And she went into one of the schools and literally had the teachers tell the students about the two mindsets so they could know that there were two mindsets. One of the kids, when he was told about it, you know what he said? When he found out there was a growth mindset, he says, "You mean I don't need to be dumb anymore?" He simply thought that he didn't succeed in math, so he was dumb, and there's nothing he could do about it. So why try? And that's actually one of the byproducts of the fixed mindset. Is sometimes it's a lot of guilt and blame, because you think that you either come with it or you don't. So if you think you are going to fail, if you think you're going to take a test that's too hard for you, what do? You don't take the test, because you don't want for people to know that you are dumb. So you either run away and don't take it, or if you take the test and you don't pass it, it means you're not smart. So you have to blame somebody else. Well, the teacher was a horrible teacher. The book was horrible. Right? It becomes about somebody else. It becomes a culture of blame. Actually, another thing that she did study was this great decline. So she followed these students, and she followed students who she identified were folks that had the fixed mindset and those that had a growth mindset, and followed them from high school into college, which is a big transition in all our lives. And even the students that did really well, right, she followed through. When they got to college, all of a sudden, they were no longer the best students in their little pond. They were now in college with a lot of great students. So they were now struggling. They no longer were in the limelight. And she also noticed the same thing, that those students that were high-performing, that had the fixed mindset, now were blaming and were struggling, right? They were blaming the teachers. They were blaming the coursework. They were blaming all these kinds of things because they used to be successful, and all of a sudden they aren't anymore. So there's something wrong. But there were also other high-performing students that when they got there and they really did not do well at all in chemistry and physics, typically very difficult things at college for folks, they said, you know what, I have to figure something out here. I have to find a way and talk to people, and they start to looking for patterns, like how can I do this, how can I do that, can I find different ways, and they were able to succeed. And so a great example of these mental barriers that we put in ourselves, right, because these are all self-assumed. We take them on, and sometimes we put our hats on and say, hey, I have ability for this or I don't. Or I could learn this and I don't. And every person is different. And maybe we do the fixed mindset for some things and the growth mindset for others. The same person, right? In different parts of our lives, whatever it is. But it's interesting to know that we can choose which mindset we have, which mental posture we have towards life. And that's the important thing that's liberating about her research. In fact, there's a funny story that I think it's very indicative of that. There was a student in Berkeley. His name was George Danzig. He was late for math class. He was a math student. So he gets there one day. He's always late because he wasn't, the best disciplined kid. He gets there at the end of the day. The class is over. There's only some problems on the board. I'm like, oh, that's my homework. So he takes those two problems of math at home. They're hard. They're really hard. He struggles with them. He sticks with them for days and comes back. But eventually he's feeling great because, he stuck with them and he solved the problems. And he came back and showed his teacher. You know what those problems happen to be? An example of two equations that have never been solved before in the history of mathematics. And he did it. Probably because he didn't know they were impossible. Impossible, right? So he had a growth mindset. He was going to figure it out. Had he been told, oh, these are, historical problems in the history of mathematics that have never been solved, maybe he would not even have attempted it. Because like most of us, why will I try it if I will fail? Because we sometimes think failure is a bad thing. And it isn't. Sometimes we need to fail forward. That is, we made a mistake and we move on. Now we learned how not to do something. And that's the growth mindset that we need to apply to ourselves. And that's why it's so beautiful about Spiritism in general, is because it tells us that we are not a finished product. We know there's reincarnation. We know we come back many times. So we must necessarily tell ourselves that we should have a growth mindset to all things. That's how God made us, with lots of choices for learning and for growth. We know that in an intellectual level, but oftentimes we fail to apply that in our lives, right? And when we apply that to ourselves and to others, it has a big impact. An example of that is a research that she saw in Germany with teachers this time. She followed teachers around who believed that, kids either had a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. So the teachers who had fixed mindset, in the beginning of the year, they would go and see which students were really high achieving. And by the end of the year, guess what? Those were the same students who were high achieving. It kind of stayed as it is. They just believed that those students were always the good students, so they always got good grades. And the other ones, some movement, but not so much. And the other teachers were taught about the growth mindset. And there was more movement from people, right? So kids in those classes that were struggling before were able to rise up to the top. Simply because they were given the whole speech about, yes, you can change yourself. And the teacher was also open to the fact that they were not fixed products either, that they too could change. So how often do we do this in our lives? Do we think that people are fixed products, right? Fixed quantities and fixed models. That we think, oh, that person's never going to change. It's not in that nature. That's us applying the fixed mindset to other people. We want the benefit of doubt, but we apply the label of fixed to other people. And now we know through Spiritism that that's not the case, right? But the question then here really is, which one of these methods or these growth mindsets do we use on a regular basis? And when and how? Because we can have the fixed mindset for some things, and for others we can have a growth mindset. So it's not that we are fixed in one way or not. That would be very fixed mindset of us to think that way. Sometimes sometimes we're able to take things in stride and change ourselves, and sometimes we get ourselves fixated in something. So our job as people, as spirits, as immortal spirits who are constantly evolving, is to reevaluate ourselves, right? And that obviously applies to our own lives. But maybe, just maybe, on our trek to ascendance, to being better spirits, people, whatever it is that you want to call, maybe there is something more than that, than just succeeding ourselves. Of course, succeeding and improving yourselves is a big part of it. But I wanted to bring in another example which I think is so powerful. So we can examine a parable together and then try to find out how things play out when it comes to growth and mindset. Would you be willing to do that? All right. So we all have heard the parable of the multiplication of the fishes and the loaves, right? It's one of my favorites. And I took the version from John, chapter 6, and it goes like this. We'll read it and then we'll talk about it, right? Looking up, I'm going to give you some context first. So what's happening here is Jesus is almost at the end of his mandate, right? He's almost at the end of his his life here on earth with us. And he's gone to different places, and now there's this crowd following him wherever he goes. And so he takes some time for himself, and he goes into the Sea of Galilee in the boat. And when he comes back, there's this crowd, about 5,000 people, that are waiting for him because they're hanging on his every word, as they probably should. And he then, the New Testament then tells us that he spent time with them in the morning, he healed their sick, and he talked to them. And in the afternoon, they were not going away. They were still hanging around, right? They didn't want to go away. I imagine it was probably a beautiful, soft afternoon with a beautiful wind by the Sea of Galilee, with the sun setting, just a perfect temperature where everybody's happy. And I venture that the atmosphere was fantastic. Imagine our great atmosphere that we have here today of enjoying, they multiplied it by 10. That must have been something special. And then noticing that these people have been there for the whole day following Jesus. Jesus looking up, sees a crowd of 5,000, and approaching, coming closer to him, and said to Philip, "Where can we buy some bread for these people to eat?" Jesus, I put some colors there so we can kind of pick people up. He said this only to put Philip to the test. He himself knew exactly what he was going to do. Philip answered, 200 denarii would not buy enough to give them a little piece each. And Jesus continues. Okay, if I want to get this. Okay, there we go. And then another disciple, Andrew, who was around, who was the brother of Peter, said, "Here's a small boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what is that amongst so many, 5,000 people?" Jesus said to them, "Make the people sit down." There was plenty of grass there, and as many as 5,000 men sat down. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were sitting there. He then did the same with the fish, distributing as much as they wanted. When they had eaten enough, he said to the disciples, "Pick up the pieces that are left over so that nothing is wasted." So they picked them up and filled 12 large baskets with scraps left over from the meal of 5 barley loaves. And it's a really powerful idea. So imagine that. Jesus comes to Peter and asks the question. He asks the question of, look at the question, how interesting it is. He says, where can we buy some bread? It's not like, should we buy some bread? It's, where can we buy some bread? And Philip, a disciple, right, following clearly a very cool guy, he is worried about this too, and his mind goes into thinking, oh my God, there's 5,000 people. We're by the Sea of Galilee. There's probably no grocery markets around here, right? 5,000 people, there's a lot of food that we have to kind of all of a sudden procure, right? And we only have 200 denarii, which is a good chunk of money because the apostles put their money together into a purse, but not enough to feed 5,000 people. So he starts thinking about the logistics of it, right? And he ends up at the realization that with 200 denarii, and with no grocery markets around, there's no way he can feed those people. He can't find a place to buy bread. So he says, 200 denarii would not buy enough to give them a little piece each. He actually factored out in his head how much it would take. Not even a piece of the loaf would he be able to afford, right? He's really thinking about all this. He's putting a lot of thought into it. He's a great guy. But it exemplifies the fact that he had a fixed mindset. Because he stops right there. And then we get another example, which is that of Andrew, who was listening in, right? And Andrew says, I don't know what to do, but there's a boy here with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, right? What did Jesus ask for? Bread, right? And he comes with bread and fishes, right? He's like, I know you asked for bread, but I know that your intent was to feed these people. So I'm thinking outside the box. I got bread and I got some fish. Right? Whatever I could find to fulfill that goal, right? The mission. And then what did Jesus say? Make the people sit down. And the interesting thing here is that you can see by the colors, right? There's a lot of green, there's a lot of Jesus there. And then Jesus did all the work. Isn't that true? So what we find here is something very interesting. In terms of mindset, we find that Philip had a little bit of a fixed mindset. He looked at it and said, this cannot be done. It's fixed. There's no way we can do this. Andrew had what kind of mindset? A growth mindset. He didn't know how it could be done, but he tried. He started it, right? So in that sense, it makes sense for us to say that Philip has a fixed mindset because Philip didn't even want to try because he knew it was impossible. Andrew didn't know it was possible. He was going to try. So he was in the growth mindset. And the really interesting piece here is that once we try, we have somebody else in the picture here. And what kind of mindset do you think that Jesus had? It's more of a growth mindset, but I'm going to say that's even beyond the growth mindset. I'm going to call it, for lack of a better word, a cosmic mindset, right? Because from the beginning, he knew he was possible. It was possible. That's why he was even asking Philip. He was testing him. Remember them? He knew this was going to happen, but he asked people because he was not only worried about growing personally, but he was worried about the growth of others. So he gave Philip a chance to solve the problem, and Andrew too. He's so in tune to it all, and to the 5,000 people, it was about the collective good. He was far ahead than both of them were. All that to say that when we have the right attitude towards things, when we are imbued with the right passion, posture, and will towards things, when we put that action that we talked about in the question, the thoughts into action, and the purpose is noble, it will happen. Not because we ask for ourselves, but because Jesus, God, the divinity, will step in and make it happen. All of this fantastic story about 5,000 people being fed with loaves of bread and some fish is really an indication of that. That for us, what is asked, the role of Philip and Andrew, which are us, right, is to try to figure it out. Even when we can't, divinity, by way of Jesus, will come in and help us get started. And what I think is fascinating here too is that not only does he then tell people to sit down and calm, Jesus, not only does he say thank you to God for making it all possible, because it's not for him that he's asking, it's for other people. It comes through him. So he's a vessel. He tells people to pass the bread and the fishes around, and there are leftovers. I'm going to repeat this again. There are leftovers. The abundance of love and joy and how God provides for us. From the little that we have or don't have, when we put that into action, through the mercy of God, that is multiplied. And there's not only enough to feed us, but there's more than enough to fill a multitude of people that we are not aware of. And it goes beyond. There's enough to feed a multitude of people, and there are leftovers, which Jesus says, collect all of them so they are not wasted. So they collect all the leftovers so they can do it again. The love of the Father is so immense and fantastic that our duty, our part of this whole thing, our role in the big enigma of the cosmos, is to simply put ourselves in a posture where we are willing to go forward, where we are willing to develop a growth mindset and say, maybe I don't know how to solve this, but I know it's possible. And there are other people out there that will help me, that God will help me when my quest is noble, when I have to feed other people, when other people feed me. And when are we then, who are we here in the process? Are we Philip, Andrew, Jesus? We're all of them in the parable. Sometimes we behave like Philip. Sometimes we behave like Andrew. And sometimes, the more we grow, Jesus calls us to multiply the gifts of others. That is our role too in our lives, is to multiply the gifts of people around us. Be in the Spiritist Center, be at a home, be at a work, is to transform whatever great things other people have in small quantities into wonderful things for all to have in large quantities. And that's how we shift from just our own fixed mindset to a growth mindset and to a cosmic mindset. That's the kind of choices we want to make in our daily lives. We want to look for the first choice, which is, I am ready and willing and able to go forward. How many times do we hear the whole thing, oh, I have great ideas, but I'm just waiting for this to happen before I can begin, right? I'm going to wait until I have money to do this, right? Sometimes we'll say, I can't do that just yet. There's no way I can bring 300 people into an event. Do you know how much work that is? I would have to sell tickets. I would have to put tables at the back for people to do camera work. I would have to do presentations, PowerPoints. I have to carry books back and forth the day before. I have to sell coffee. People are going to complain about the coffee because the line was too big. I'm going to have to, bring muffins because we have to feed them, and they're going to complain that there's no options on the muffins. Then we're going to have to pay rent. Then, oh my God, they're going to complain because we're taking money, but we have to pay rent. There's a room. And then we have to figure out how to set the AC because it's going to be hot, and parking, there'll be parking. And you know what? Let's not do it. It's just too much work. It's impossible. Not in the short time frame. That's a little bit of Philip, right? The invitation today is for us to be a little bit more Andrew and say, oh, I don't know about all this, but I know that we can't put this event together. I know that we can do this together. Let's figure out who can help. So there's a boy right here with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Hey, come over here, buddy. Let me buy those 5 loaves off of you. Then comes another worker, and then another, and then by the mercy of God, the banquet's laid right ahead of us. And all of a sudden we have an event. And we do not think how this event came to be. We do not think of the people who could be here speaking, but instead they're helping us with PowerPoints back there, or filming, or carrying boxes. It just happens through the mercy and grace of God. But yet it all takes place. And what is our role in it? To be ready, willing, and able to take part in this. To see the biggest picture of all. To understand that we are immortal beings on a trajectory to success. That we are destined for success, and that God loves us and put all of us in each other's way so that we can help each other and help ourselves go up that hill of enlightenment. But the way to do that is through choices. And choices are hard because there's so many of them. They're very hard. That's why Jesus said that the path to the door is narrow. There's so many different choices, but there's only one great simple way for us to start and accomplish all these things, which is to change the way we think about them. To make the fundamental choice of saying, I am an immortal spirit who is growing and who is fallible and will make mistakes. And so are my neighbors. So I'm going to go out there today. I'm going to do the best I can. And when I make a mistake, I will apologize. I'll pick myself up and I will go. I will not shy away from challenges. I will not hold other people to the fixed mindset because I am not a fixed product either. And once we do that, we've made perhaps the most important choice that we have, freedom of conscience. We have placed ourselves in a position where divinity can come in and multiply our gifts, even if we don't know what they are just yet. When we open ourselves to the possibilities that we can accomplish great things, even though we don't know how to start, divinity will come in and do the rest. And it will be so beautiful because all the noble ideas that we have will be fed. And others around us will benefit from that, and so will we. And there will be plenty left over for when we want to do this again, because we're not fixed. We're going to do this again. And sometimes in our day-to-day lives, it's really hard for us to see all this. Why we're choosing what mustard to put in our hot dogs, what bills to pay first, where to go for dinner, which house to move into. All very noble questions themselves. What we get reminded by the multiplication of the fishes and loaves is for us to be open to the bigger picture of being with the 5,000 on the beach, listening to Jesus. An invitation that has been echoing through the times, saying, come, you who are weary. And in the process of doing so, we will be transformed beyond belief. And we will find that the choices that were so easy and simple, that seem so innocent and harmless, are perhaps the most powerful ones we ever do. Be open. Be open to the greatness of God. Whichever way it comes in, whichever name you call it, be ready. And all it takes you wanting to be ready. Your mindset today affects tomorrow. And when in doubt, resort to the tools you have. You have many tools, 350 tools here in this house. You also have the Spiritist body of knowledge that helps you sort through things when you don't know where to go. Use those. Because indeed, that's actually one of the things that we see too in choice, that there will always be provided for us. I'm reminded of another part of the Gospel of John when Jesus says, "And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to help you and be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him." Spirits, they speak to us. They are neither seen nor accepted. But you know him, for he lives with you and will be with you. Those leftovers that we all had at that evening with Jesus, 5,000 strong, 2,000 years ago, are still with us. And today we celebrate one of them. We celebrate the pearl of light, which is the gospel as explained by Spiritism, celebrating 150 years of that fish, that piece of bread that has been given to us. A book that has been compiled and still nourishes our souls just from the Sermon of the Mount, from a small piece of Jesus' teachings. From 12 or so lines, a whole book came and it transformed our lives, Spiritists. But the invitation is that not only do we value that and study that and be open to the mindset of growth that Spiritism brings to us, telling us about how God is good and just and loves us, and how we're going to come through incarnation and do it again, until we improve, until we're better, until we're all happy, until we are all fed and find ourselves in that beach, in that day, satisfied, content to be together, to having worked together, to having making the fundamental choice of being there. That's where it always starts. So when we think of the freedom of choice and all that we have, let's celebrate 150 years of the gospel as explained by Spiritism, a fraction of the gospel of Christ that we're still struggling to learn, so that eventually we can see the big picture again and start today by making the simple and fundamental choice of taking the first step in our evolution to be happy. God wants it. We want it. Let's do it. The call is not for tomorrow. It's not for 2 months from now. It's for right now. Let's do it right now. And I will be honored if we all did it together. So as we leave the event tonight, after we listen to our great teacher, Divaldo, let's take these possibilities in our hearts and say, together we can do beautiful things. Together we can accomplish all of this. But all it takes is goodwill among men here on earth. There's always the desire to move forward. And I, for one, look very forward to being with all of you again, maybe next year, so we can continue to explore the beautiful tools that are given to us so that we can become better. God bless all of you from the deep inside my heart. God bless you.